Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of moral lessons from the Quran. Today we are going to study another passage from the Quran. I'm just going to share my screen with you and read out the text and translation of the passage that we are going to study today. This is a passage from Surah Al-Imran, the third surah, verses 130 to 136. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la ta'kulur riba adha'afan mudha'afa wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun wattaqun nar allati u'iddat lil kafirin wa atiyullaha war rasul la'allakum turhamun wasari'u ila maghfiratin min rabbikum wa jannatin 'arduha as-samawati wal ardu u'iddat lil muttaqin الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين والذين إذا فعلوا فاحشة أو ظلموا أنفسهم ذكروا الله والذين إذا فعلوا فاحشة أو ظلموا أنفسهم ذكروا الله فاستغفروا لذنوبهم ومن يغفر الذنوب إلا الله ولم يصروا على ما فعلوا وهم يعلمون أولئك جزاؤهم مغفرة من ربهم وجنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ونعم أجر العاملين. Believers, if in future also you want God's help, do not consume this interest, doubling it many times over, and keep fearing God that you may prosper, and protect yourselves against the fire that has been prepared for the disbelievers, and remain obedient to God and His Messenger, that you earn mercy, and run to advance to the forgiveness of your Lord and to paradise, which is as vast as the heavens and the earth, prepared for the righteous who spend in all circumstances, whether they are in ease or in hardship. And even if they encounter any excesses from those whom they spend, they curb their anger and forgive people. These are people who are thorough in their deeds, and God befriends those people who are thorough in their deeds. And such are they that if they commit a lewd act or do something evil to themselves, remember God and seek forgiveness for their sins. And who but God can forgive sins? And do not deliberately persist in what they have done. It is these who shall be rewarded with forgiveness from their Lord, and with orchards beneath which streams will flow. They shall dwell there forever. And what a grand reward this is for those who do righteous deeds. So, my dear listeners, as you just have gone through this text and translation, you can see how enchanting these words of the Quran are and how moving they are. And the first verse actually is spoken in reference to the battle of Uhud, in which, of course, the help of God arrived, and it was only after His help that the victory of the Muslims was partially made possible. So it is in this context that it is said that if in future also you would like to have God's help at your disposal, then one of the things that you must not do is la ta'kulu riba adha'afan mudha'afa, which means do not consume interest, doubling it many times over, which means, of course, interest which is charged at an exorbitant rate. And mind you, this doesn't mean that, as has been generally understood from this verse, that perhaps usury is something which the Quran is prohibiting, because when it is said that do not charge interest at a higher rate or doubling it many times over, people think that if it is charged at a normal rate or a reasonable rate, then the Quran is actually not prescribing or prohibiting interest. So that is not the case. This style of the Quran has to be understood when the heinous nature of a certain thing is so extreme that at times you have to point it out to make the listeners or the addressees, to caution and prod them and really make them realize what a mistake they are doing. So it's just like saying that you're telling the lies, and that too while standing in a mosque. So what would that mean? Would it mean that you can tell lies when you're standing outside the mosque? No. Of course, telling lies, whether you're inside or outside the mosque, is a wrong thing. But when you do something in the mosque, it increases the intensity of that evil. So in a very similar way, the style which is adopted here, la ta'kulu riba adha'afa mudha'afa, it doesn't mean that charging interest at a higher rate is being prohibited. What it means is that you're charging interest, and that too while doubling, tripling it. So you're in the mosque and lying in the mosque and speaking falsehoods. So it's just, and by analogy, you can see what is meant here is not the fact that high interest rate is being prohibited. No, what is being said is that you're charging interest, and that too at an exorbitant extent. So this is the sense that we have to understand from this verse of the Quran. And it says that this is, if you do something like this, then remember this is something that will not earn you God's help at all. So if you would like to earn God's help, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, then you fear God so that you may prosper. And not only you fear God, you see exactly in parallel the words are وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. So on the one hand, you should fear God from making him displeased with you so that you could prosper. And on the other hand, you should fear the hellfire which has been prepared for those who disbelieve. And this is a very common feature of the Quran, as all of you students of the Quran might have now very well noticed, that parallel things, they are often juxtaposed together. And whenever the fate of the evildoers is mentioned, immediately after that, the fate of the righteous is mentioned. This is a very common style of the Quran. And here too, that style has been adopted. So after delineating both these fates, it is said, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. So it is in the best interest of you that you follow God and you follow the messenger. Remember, you had not listened to the messenger in the battle of Uhud when he had deputed you at certain positions, and you had left those positions vacant, and which had caused that loss and in the battle of Uhud. So if you have to prosper, then you have to listen to God and to the messenger. And the point that is being conveyed is that at times the directives which are given to them, they might seem as if you have done following them, while not realizing that it is in the fitness of thing to go to take great pains in actually following those directives in letter and in spirit, and not neglecting them in any way. So it says, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ, you have to follow God and his messenger, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. And then وَصَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ عِدَّةٍ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And the style of this Arabic verse is so beautiful, it's so moving. It says that you run to the forgiveness of your Lord, and that forgiveness from your Lord is what is paradise. And the length and breadth of this paradise is like the length of breadth of these heavens and the earth, and it has been prepared for these righteous. It has been prepared for these people who fear the Almighty, who would like to always comply with his directives, not only just to follow those directives, but to follow them in letter and spirit. So, sari'u ila maghfirat. And so, such is this appeal. The words which are used are so enchanting, if I might say, that they create this inspiration in us, this motivation in us, that we have to run to the forgiveness of God and run to his paradise. And the vastness of paradise is as vast as the heavens and the earth, that, of course, referring to the fact that it is beyond our imagination, because the length and breadth of these heavens and the earth is something that we cannot gauge in its proper extent. And u'iddat lil muttaqin. So remember, this paradise is something which has been prepared for those who are God-fearing, for those who are God-conscious. And then another quality of these muttaqin is then delineated, and that is allazina yunfiquna fi as-sarra'i wad-dharra'i wal-khazimin al-ghayz wal-'afina 'anil nas. So these are the ones who spend, and when they spend in ease and in hardship. Allazina yunfiquna fi as-sarra'i wad-dharra'. So what happens is that when they spend in these circumstances, or the circumstances that they find them in, whether they are in circumstances which are conducive, whether they are in circumstances which are very, very beneficent to them. They are leading a luxurious life. Or on the other hand, when they are constrained or straitened in their circumstances, they don't withhold their hands. So whatever their situation may be, whatever they have, they don't withhold. And at other instances, we have verses to the effect, "Allazina yunfiquna amwalahum bil-layli wan-nahar sirran wa alaniya." So these are the people, yunfiquna amwalahum bil-layli wan-nahar, who spend their wealth morning and evening. Now, the word morning and evening, of course, doesn't mean that they spend in the morning and spend in the evening. So these words are, they embrace the whole day, as if it is said that they are on the lookout to spend whenever the time comes, whenever they have the opportunity. Sirran wa alaniya, which means whether it's hidden or whether it's open, they are always on the lookout to spend. So precisely it is here, it is the words used are allazina yunfiquna fis sarra'i wad dharra. They are the ones who spend if they can afford a large amount, of course, even then they spend. And if they are in straitened circumstances, fis dharra, even then they don't withhold themselves, because they think that the test of spending is not the amount, it is actually your own intent and your own sincerity. And whatever you can spare in the situation that you are in is most acceptable to God. And then al-kazimin al-ghayza wal-afina anin-nas. So what happens is that, as the verse says, that at times when you are spending and you encounter any excesses from those whom you spend upon, or they spend upon, they curb their anger and forgive people. So you see, this is a very, very pertinent advice, that at times when you spend on people, and those people at times become rude to you, and this happens in the humdrum of life, in the various situations and states of life that we go through. At times, people to whom you do a favor, they don't react, or they don't respond in a manner that they should respond later on, because of something else that might have arisen. And as a result, you get very angry, and you remember that, well, this is the person who I did a favor. This is the person on whom I spent so much money, or I gave so much money, or I helped that person so much. It is here that we are cautioned and we are told, al-kazimin al-ghayza wal-afina anin-nas, when such is the instance that you feel that anger that you have spent on people, and they are being rude to you later on in some other time of life, maybe, or in some other situation, and you suddenly remember that in the past you had been very kind to them, then this doesn't warrant that you express your favor to them and you are angry with them. In fact, what the Quran says, well, afina anin nas, they forgive people for this anger or this intrepiditude. And wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin, and Almighty God Almighty is one who loves those people who are righteous, who do goodness. And so therefore, spending in the way of God, and spending in the way of God that you think that the person on whom you have spent is someone who's talking back to you, and therefore not being thankful enough to you, is something which has to be understood in the light of this, that when you're doing something for God, you must forget what the other person's response is. You are doing something purely to please God. And this requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of commitment, and of course, this courage to face adversity and bad manners if they come your way. And then another very important thing is mentioned in these verses, and that is something that we all have to give ear to, and that is وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً أَوْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ ذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا لِذُنُوبِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. Subhanallah, what a beautiful piece of advice this is. It is that such are they, that if they commit a lewd deed or do something evil to themselves, which is وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً أَوْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ, which means that if they do something which is crossing the limits in sexual affairs and sexual matters, or they are doing something which is unjust to their souls, they remember God. It is something which makes them immediately realize that they have stumbled into something, and they just immediately withdraw and seek forgiveness for their sins. فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا لِذُنُوبِهِمْ, and وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ, and who except God can forgive their sins. So this is what the Almighty wants us. I mean, we just cannot be sinless people. We're not angels, we are human beings. But if we are if we have become indulgent, if we have sexually transgressed, or we have done some other wrong to ourselves, then Zakarullah, immediately remember the Almighty, immediately realize our mistake, and God says, وَمَن يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. Who else but God is going to forgive you for this? And then another thing is mentioned, which is of tremendous assurance. In fact, this is an attitude which entails this tremendous assurance from God Almighty, and that is وَلَمْ يُسِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. And they do not deliberately persist in what they have done. It is these who shall be given forgiveness and who shall be rewarded, as the verse says, أُولَٰئِكَ جَزَاؤُهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَجَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ. They do not deliberately persist in what they have done. وَلَمْ يُسِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. So what they have done deliberately, I mean, they do not deliberately persist, which means that whatever wrong that they have done, they don't become audacious upon it. They don't continue to do it. They immediately realize they are not deliberate on their sin. They immediately retract and come back and knock the doors of the Almighty. And this is what makes them true believers, that they don't insist and persist on that sin and immediately come out of it. And this is the sign of a true believer, that when he stumbles upon a sin and when he at times deviates, and that is a deliberate thing that he does, then they don't deliberately persist. I mean, if they do something out of ignorance or out of a willful act, but they do not deliberately persist. The Quran says, وَلَمْ يُسِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. They do not deliberately persist on the wrong they do. And this is a great quality which every humble believer is expected to have. And for such people it is said, أُولَٰئِكَ جَزَاؤُهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَجَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا. These verses now must have become very familiar to you, because they are a description of the paradise which the Almighty has prepared for the righteous. So it says that, and for them is forgiveness from their Lord, and they will be rewarded with orchards beneath which streams will flow. They shall dwell there forever. And what a grand reward this is for those who do righteous. Now, when these words are used in the Quran, remember, there's one thing that you need to understand, and otherwise it might be a means of misconception. You often find these words, tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, jannatun tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, which means orchards beneath which streams flow. Orchards beneath which streams flow. And some people have interpreted this to mean that there would be underground streams below orchards. This is not what the Quran is implying here. If you gather all these verses and also know a bit of the Arab culture and the Arab mind, for them, an orchard which would be placed on a high mountain top, that would make it more protective against winds and against water, would be something of an ideal. So when it is said tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, it doesn't mean that these orchards have underground canals. It means that these orchards are at great heights. They are at mountain tops or at hilltops, and in the valley of those hills or in the mountains of those hills, there are streams. So this is the picture. So it's not underground canals that are being spoken of here. Rather, what is being said is that the high altitude of these orchards would be such, which makes them so beautiful, that on the one hand you will be in those orchards and gardens plucking those fruits, and you would be peeping down and seeing those streams and canals running around the hills of the area in which you would be. So this is just one thing that I intended to clarify, because at times this gives the impression that perhaps what the Quran is telling us, that paradise will have underground canals. And the last beautiful words with which this passage ends is وَنِعْمَ أَجْرُ الْعَامِلِينَ. And what a grand reward this is for those who do righteous deeds. Of course, grand it is, and grand inshallah it will be. Let's pray that we are able to be worthy of such a place. We are able to land in such a place, and it is a place that we not only dream of, but we also aspire and make this commitment as we enter these last few days of Ramadan, that inshallah what we have done and tried to do in understanding the Quran and making ourselves close to the Quran, we will continue with this endeavor for the rest of the 11 months until the next Ramadan arrives. And this would be constant, it would be a constant affair in which we are going to read parts of the Quran personally or privately, as I would suggest, that taking out time of 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes, and it's not even necessary to read the Quran in a sequential way. You can just open up the Quran from any part and start reading for some time, and this gives you that freshness in your mind. It revives your faith. It makes you as if a rejuvenated person, and you feel as if you have been given a spiritual injection, so to speak. So with these words, I end my talk here, and I'm now available for your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. First, I would like to take a written question, which is in connection to a question you answered a few days ago. This is in connection with the faith-based lifestyles and acts of worship Muslims engage with, because that is how they have processed their understanding of Islam as a means of showing the devotion to Allah. So in case of the traditions passed down with the notions of hijab and parda, where the two contexts of Surah Nur and Surah Ahzab are conflated, for being a devoted Muslim woman, one has to conform to a particular dress code. In Salafi understanding, it requires women to be covered in black from head to toe, with black gloves and socks, and a perforated black covering for their eyes. Another visible form around the world is of different headgears that Muslim women sport to cover their hair. But after they interact with the same conflation of ayahs of Surah Nur and Ahzab in a different interpretive setup, such as that of the Farai school or by Khalid Abul Fadl, there's a tough internal conflict that they're faced with. A, if there are no such injunctions in the Quran, would their act of adopting a certain modest lifestyle by covering their hair merely for Allah, would that go unrewarded? B, should they continue their practice now, as apparently it is now contingent not on faith anymore, but on how comfortable they feel in this current attire due to cultural reasons? So how would you guide this?
So I think the way to go about understanding these injunctions and following them is to analyze the reasoning behind them. You see, and this is not the right way that you come across various opinions, and because of the fact that there are various opinions, and one might appeal to you either because of the fact that you find the majority following them, or you find that perhaps your own parents or your close society was following them, or maybe because it's a cultural thing. It could be any number of reasons. The real reason for adopting a particular attire for a Muslim woman or for a Muslim man, or for that matter any directive, should be what you have understood from the Quran with regards to the verses which speak of this attire. And the best way to do this is to have a very small, take out some time and do some comparative study, because this is going to be just a comparative study that you would do once and for all. Of course, there could be evolution as well, but basically it would be a one-time study to start off with, in which you compare one or two or three contesting opinions and see what they say and what is the reason behind whatever they're recommending, whether it's like a full burqa or a perforated burqa with eyes there, or it's like head covering or not a head covering, or a face veil or not a face veil. So when I was discussing this topic, I think I remember that I analyzed the two contesting opinions or the three contesting opinions in these particular verses, and I gave the arguments which are given by the proponents of these schools of thought from their books. And I think the purpose was to make you choose and make your own selection, that which one of those are the ones that you should select. So I think that it's a question of your own intellect that you must use, and don't be afraid that if you would choose something wrong, that then that would be the end of it. No, that's not going to be the end of it, because if you do it something sincerely, if the choice is not out of any convenience or self-interest, but it is because of what you have truly intellectually understood and it made sense to you, then even if it was ultimately wrong, even then the Quran tells us that the Almighty would treat you to what you believed, how true you were to your own understanding. So whatever you understood, did you follow that understanding? That is going to be the real test. And this, I say, is one of the tests that all of us are put through. We are not just put through the trial of life, for example, by various calamities like poverty or sickness or the passing away of a dear departed. No, we are also put to the trial of knowledge, and that is what I call the quest for the truth, to find out what the truth is in religious matters. And that is another form of trial that all of us face. And there are, if I enumerate, maybe 10 or 15 instances in which there are major differences in interpretation. And because of this, I made it a point to give some lectures not only on the Quran but also on the Hadith, because these major differences either rely on an interpretation of a particular passage of the Quran or certain ahadith. And I have covered the ahadith to a greater extent, and inshallah I'll be covering the Quran. I think I've covered some aspects which are very important to life, and there are some remaining which I shall cover. And I'm sure there are a lot of other academicians who have done this, from which you can benefit. There are books also, but this is the way forward. So take it as a challenge that you would like to understand what exactly is the Quran, because our test is to understand what the Quran tells us and what we have understood from the Quran, and forget what other people think of. Even if they make fun of you or they criticize you, that's something that all of us have to go through. The prophets of God had gone through much worse things. So take this as a challenge, study and analyze, and to the best of your ability, adopt what appeals to your intellect and understanding the most.
Thank you, Dr. Stab. It's a very delicate line one has to pass, because again, when you are adopting a different school of thought, but you have to live in a collectivist society. So it is a very big conundrum that people are faced with. Thank you. Fatma, would you like to please go forward with your question?
Assalamu alaikum. My question is a follow-up question from my yesterday's question. So basically, you said that the man is the head of the family, and what I understand from the 34th ayat of Surah Nisa is that is because he bears the financial responsibility. Like it said that मर्द औरतों के सरबराह बनाए गए हैं इसलिए कि अल्लाह ने एक को दूसरे पर फजीलत बख्शी और इसलिए कि उन्होंने अपने माल खर्च किए हैं. So if that's the reason, then in circumstances where the woman is bearing the financial responsibility and the man is not working at all, or if he's working, he's contributing very little. Like it's the woman who is bearing all the financial responsibility. So in that situation, would the woman be the head of the family and the man has to be compliant to her? Is it related to who is bearing the financial responsibility?
I think I explained this yesterday, that it is not just the financial responsibility part which makes the husband the head of the family. There are two things which are mentioned, and you just read those two things separately in your translation. So the first of them is bima faddalallahu ba'dahum ala ba'd, because one is made more superior to the other in certain things, and because they spend on their family. So there are two things. So the first is that whether they spend or not, I mean, this is just one disqualification. If they are not properly catering for their family, if they are misusing authority, of course, this would make them liable before the Almighty. This would not actually disturb the balance of the family, I would say, but it would severely make the family go through a lot of stress because the husband is not following what he has been told to. But then, as I said, there are two things which make the husband eligible to be the head of the family. The first thing is that husbands in general are temperamentally, physiologically, psychologically, mentally, I mean, they are more suitable for this job to head the family as decision makers. So the bima faddalallahu ba'dahum ala ba'd, this is a separate clause, and this is the first condition. So even if the husband is not contributing much, I mean, there could be several reasons for this. One is that maybe he's sick, maybe he's working and he's still in the process of finding a job. Or the third is that he's a complete, a person who has given up on his family, and he's not the right sort of a person, and he's left everything to the wife, which of course is going to turn the balance of decisions also in a lot of things in a very grave manner. That is going to upset some of the decisions. But because of the fact that the Quran does not merely say that financially supporting someone is the sole reason for him to become the head of the family, the other part in which it says that because of the fact that men are more suitable for this job. So these are the two reasons given. So I, in my personal opinion, think, and my understanding is that unless both these opinions are somehow done away with, both these aspects are done away with, which of course would mean that maybe a husband has lost his senses totally, and he is of course not earning, then only perhaps this could be an automatic choice. Otherwise, if one of them is still there, that would not be sufficient to make the wife the head of the family.
I would say that even like in apparently abusive relationships where the man is not making any money and he's alcoholic and whatever, still the woman is required to be compliant to him.
Remember, the compliance that we discussed was something in detail yesterday. So what exactly the compliance means? I mean, she has her own life to live. She can take decisions which relate to her person, like, for example, being a professional, following a particular lifestyle, having a particular religious view. So there are certain independent traits which as human, I would say these are human rights, which are invested by the Almighty for every human being. So we are not talking about those rights. So if you remember our last night's discussion, we were talking about issues in which there is a deadlock. And that deadlock relates more to administrative issues than to the issues which we generally wrongly estimate that they are the ones which come under this verse. So not only has this verse been misinterpreted for other reasons, but one of the reasons of misinterpreting, or one of the misinterpretations of this verse, is that this verse actually virtually gives husbands the authority to dictate the life pattern, the life choices, and all the priorities of life which wives have, which is not, of course, what this verse is speaking of, which I tried to clarify yesterday. It is basically that those administrative decisions, which are mostly administrative, in which there is a deadlock, that the husband has the casting vote. So I think if you understand this fact, and if you're referring to the fact that they are abusive relationships, yes, that's another issue. So if in an abusive relationship, of course, being the head of the family, this hardly matters. When a person is doing something so bad that he is abusing, or maybe even lifting his hands on his wife, then this is such a extreme situation. Then it hardly matters who's the head or whether he's behaving as the head, because he's not behaving like a head. He's actually behaving like a tyrant, which he would be taken to task. And even laws can be enacted in a state if a husband is behaving like this, then he could be called by the court and questioned for this abuse of power. So I think we need to clearly understand that this verse is not limiting the personal freedom of wives in any way. That's a personal space that every woman has. And if a husband tries to use this verse to limit that freedom, he, in my humble opinion, is misusing this verse.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. We have a question about the permissibility of giving zakat or sadaqah. So it relates to both sadaqatul fitr and general sadaqah. The question says, whom should we give zakat or sadaqah at the time of fasting, relatives or neighbors? Should the sadaqah be given to relatives or neighbors? Who should be given preference?
This is a call that a person has to make himself or herself. There is no rule of thumb. At times, I think the need or the nature of the need perhaps should govern this disbursement. At times, maybe your neighbor who might be very close to you, he's next door. He's the most needy in certain situations, and at other instances, it could be your own close relatives, and at still other instances, it could be your own people, your domestic staff. So you see, this is a choice that you need to make yourself, keeping in view the need of the people that are around you. And the nature of that need, is something which is at times it's so clear that it's not difficult at all to make a choice.
Thank you. I hope this must have made it clear. Shiraz Ahmed, you may have your question now.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Shehzad Bhai. Shehzad Bhai, today I have 2-3 very simple single-liner questions, and hopefully the answers will be single-liner as well. Number one, the impression I got from Qur'an Kareem is that Jannat is not the name of a place. One of the names used in Quran is Firdaus. So when the term is used in Quran, Jannatul Firdaus, it means gardens of Firdaus. So the name is Firdaus, or maybe one of the name is Firdaus, and gardens are just a description of how the place is going to look like, right? Is this understanding correct?
So when it says Jannatul Firdaus, it means gardens of Eden, gardens of eternity, gardens which are going to stay forever. This is the meaning. Otherwise, the description of paradise is basically a description of an orchard, of a countryside place in which you are enjoying yourselves. So the word Firdaus is not only at times used synonymously, but it also has that implication of gardens of eternity, as you say, gardens of Eden. If you consult any translation, you'll find words like gardens of Eden or gardens of eternity being translated. So it's like saying that these are places which would be eternal, and they would be beautiful places, like countryside places. And because of the fact that, of course, we can only imagine something which is analogous in our own space, which of course are orchards that we are used to, or the gardens that we see. So therefore, the comparison is not perfect. But I would say that this is basically gardens of eternity that is being mentioned here.
Okay, so Shehzad, that mean is Jannat the name of the place or description?
Jannat is just it depends on where it is used. The fact is that there is not going to be just one orchard. The word which are used is at times are waliman khafa rabbahu jannatan, which means they'll have two orchards or maybe more than that. So there are several places or several sections of paradise. So I would say that it's a space, and that space, it has the outlook of a paradise, of a garden, of an orchard, but there would be different levels. As the Quran clearly tells us that there are different levels, and each level will have its different facilities. For example, we know that the paradise which will belong to the Sabiqun will have certain characteristics, which is mentioned in Surah Waqia, and the paradise of the Ashabul Yameen would be slightly lesser, and its characteristics are also spelled out in Surah Waqia and Surah Rahman. So I think we should imagine it to be a space whose outlook would be like an orchard or like a garden, and it will have various levels and stages depending upon who is going to be placed where, as the Quran says. But because of the fact that it is generally, whenever it is described, the words used is al-jannat or jannat, which is either an orchard or orchards. So therefore, the space that we can actually visualize is that space will be something of some sort of a orchard or a garden, or a group of gardens that we would be blessed with. Because and again, as I said, this is an area in which we have to. I mean, we cannot just run amok in our imagination, because its actual reality will be something that we can only be able to see and witness when we go there. But we have some idea that it's a space of unbounding pleasure and facilities and luxuries. And it would be because the Arabs were used to, whenever they would think of luxurious places, they would think of countrysides and orchards and trees and crops and plantations. So this is how it is generally described in the Quran. But one extra thing which is always described is that وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِي أَنفُسُكُمْ, which means that if beyond gardens and beyond orchards, you would like some other place. I mean, there are so many places that you enjoy which will not be garden-like, which would not be orchard-like. So the Quran tells us that you will be able to even have that. So because the foremost addressees of the Quran were the Arabs, and to the Arabs, the most rewarding thing or the most enchanting thing would be an orchard. So the paradise has been mentioned. The description of paradise is according to their imagination, and with this description or with this addition, that for the rest of the times, people should not think that if I mean, it's not going to be just orchards. It would be anything that you can imagine. It could be, I mean, anything that comes to your mind. It could be a racing track that you can set up there. It could be a safari there or whatever. So the way the word paradise is mentioned, please do remember this, that the foremost addressees of the Quran were the Arabs, and for them, this was the description that actually appealed to them, and hence the Quran used those words and made that sentence come after it, so that we people living centuries after them, if we don't think that orchards or gardens are something that we can enjoy, or there's something which are ultimate, then we are given this option. Well, whatever comes to your mind, you will be given that.
Thank you, Shelby. Just another single-liner question, and that's my last question. Generally, it's understood that in the month of Ramadan, devils are kept away from us in whatever form they are changed up or whatever. I'm not going into the terminologies, but I want to understand the concept. At individual level, it means that if I'm in Pakistan and Ramadan started and going to end on certain dates, that the devils, their effect on me is kind of minimized, or is it global level that in this world, in this year, the first date of Ramadan and the last date of Ramadan, inclusive of all the countries together, those devils will be chained up and put at some place? What's the actual concept behind this chaining up? Thank you.
Obviously, the month of Ramadan is going to occur geographically in different dates. And so, therefore, it is the month of Ramadan which is being talked about regarding all geographic locations wherever Muslims are fasting. That's sulsilati shayateen, which means that they are enchained, they are put in fetters, and the way they are given the chance in normal life to whisper evil suggestions, yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, and cause all sorts of conspiracies and make a mess out of your own thoughts. They are, I mean, fettered and enchained, so that at least the attack that they normally do in the remaining 11 months is warded off. And now the only thing that you need to fight is your own nafs, or your own inner desires. So you see, this itself is a beautiful incentive given by God, or it's like a bonus given by God, that in normal times of the year, you have two big trials. One is the trial from those devils who are always whispering evil suggestions, and I mean, they're always around you doing something. And the other is from your own nafs. So in this particular month, the only thing that you need to combat is your nafs. And as far as those devils are concerned, which try to lead you astray, God says that they are really enchained. And I, in my understanding, think that this is not a metaphor. It's not something of a symbolic thing. It is an actual thing, which means that these devils, who normally are able to, lead people astray by whispering evil suggestions, in this particular month, wherever geographically Ramadan is following, at all those places, for people who are fasting, this is a facility or a bonus which the Almighty has provided.
Shelby, just to confirm, the second part of the answer was that, for example, in Pakistan, if tomorrow is the end of Ramadan, and at some other geographical place, they have to fast for 2 more days, then for me, the devil can affect me now?
Of course, because your month of Ramadan has finished. So it is the geographical place that is the real of importance, because once you go out of Ramadan, for you that facility has been taken away. So for other areas for which are fasting for 1 more day or 2 more days, it is still there. So it's like in the month of Ramadan, the word itself says that for the month of Ramadan, this is done. And because this month varies from location to location, so I would think that this is what it means, that wherever that month is, as long as it is there, this bonus is provided.
Okay, Nusrat Khwaja, you can have your question now.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Dr.
Walaikum assalam.
I'm confused and I need your advice. I go to Taraweeh and I listen to Qur'an. My Arabic understanding is nil almost. So I listen to the Qur'an. Yes, it's being recited and I'm listening attentively, but do not understand a word, or maybe few words only. And I always think, is it better for me to sit somewhere and read Quran with translation to understand what Allah Ta'ala is telling me? Alternately, either read myself or listen to a talk, for example, Ghamidi Saab's talk or your talk on the YouTube or some. I think what will give me more understanding of what Allah Ta'ala is telling me is by listening to the talks or the translation, reading the translation myself. But Taraweeh, standing there just listening to the Arabic and just going over my head. I'm not really gaining any understanding of what Allah Ta'ala is telling me or telling me to do, or what is your opinion about it?
Well, I think you have to first make this understanding clear that when Taraweeh was actually suggested or implemented, so to speak, by the Caliph Umar in his times, there was no question of people not understanding the Quran because they were automatically aware of the Quran because they were well versed in Arabic. This is a situation which has resulted in countries in which the national language or the language of understanding is not Arabic. And as a result, we find ourselves in this fix. And this fix that you are talking about is faced by a number of Muslims, and a number of, things that you can say in response. And I cannot offer you, the options are various, and I can enumerate a couple of them. For example, you have to also understand that the prayer is of two parts. And the prayer has two parts. One are the utterances, which means whatever is read in the prayer. And the second is the posture of the prayer. You kneel, you prostrate, you stand, you sit. You sit between the prostrations. So a prayer is composed. When you're standing before God, it's not just the utterances that are going to matter. They are not the sole part of the prayer. So kneeling, prostrating, standing, sitting, they themselves are what we call rituals of the prayer. So even if you're not understanding parts of the Quran, and because in Taraweeh this becomes a major part, because you might be understanding Surah Fatiha, you might be understanding some of the other things, but the large chunk of the Quran which is read is something which might go over you, or you would just care to listen to it. So one approach could be that, okay, as far as I can, maybe not the whole 8 or 20 rakats, I would rather offer 4 or 6 or 8 or whatever the number that you can, thinking the fact that, well, I'm not just concentrating on what the Imam is reciting. I'm also doing, as I said, those rituals of the prayer. So this could be one area. The second is, of course, that you skip Taraweeh and you get up early into, or if you're not able to do it in Tahajjud, you can pray Isha at your home. And you can read the Quran while standing and the Musaf is open in front of you. And when you're glancing through it, you can glance through the translation as well and read it, put it on a table, and then do your rest of the prayer. And then when you get up, you can again get hold of the Quran and read it from the Musaf with the translation and follow it like that, as you said. And a third could be, as you said, that you do it simply by understanding the Quran without even standing in prayer and just opening up the Quran with a translation. A fourth could be you could listen to a scholar on TV or on your computer or wherever. So these are the options. But do remember, these are the problems which have arisen because of the fact that we have been educated in a way that Arabic is not a language that is understandable to a large part of the Muslim population. So these are various ways that you can adopt. But outrightly rejecting the Taraweeh simply because you think that you're not understanding, I just wanted to make that point, that do remember that if you are able to stand up even for 4 rakats or 6 rakats, not the whole maybe, and what you can do is you can also mix and match. You can pray some part behind the Imam, in which you are, of course, doing those rituals, and you can come back and do it, part of it yourself, by holding the Musaf, either at the Isha time or more appropriately, if you are able to do so, getting up a little earlier in Sehri and then reading the Musaf directly with the translation. So I think these are some of the options that come to my mind, and I often suggest. But ultimately, the choice is yours, because you see, what you need to understand is that all this is an optional act. It's an optional worship ritual, whether it's the Tahajjud or the Taraweeh or reading the Quran. It is a highly rewarding thing, obviously, and obviously this reward would be ultimate when you understand what you are reading. But if you also keep in mind that it is a mixture of reading and those postures in which you are, just imagine yourself prostrating before God. You're placing your forehead on the ground. This is a huge acknowledgement of your humility, that you are nothing before God. When you're kneeling, it's like that. So if you have those emotions with you while praying, even when you're not fully understanding what the Imam is saying, I would say that you're not completely losing out on the Taraweeh, or the benefits of the Taraweeh, I would say.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I'm reminded that in some parts of Karachi, actually, the practice that after Taraweeh, the tafsir of this
Yes.
read ayahs are also performed. Yes. There is another nuance to the question that was asked earlier about sadaqah. If both of the population, for example, the neighbors and the relatives, are in the same kind of position, monetary-wise, financial need, so who shall be given preference in this case?
You said if the two sections are the relatives, and what are the other ones? Who are the other ones?
The neighbors.
Well, you see, this is again a call that you have to make. I mean, we externally, because you see, these are subjective things at times. At times, you have objectivity when you see that the need of one is more than the other. So this becomes very objective, and then at times it becomes subjective. But the guidance that we have been given in general, if we keep the spirit of religion in mind, is the people who are related to you, they have more right on you. So therefore, if I am given the choice between a relative and a neighbor, and if it's an equal sort of a thing, so I will go for the relative, because a relative has more right on me as per the Book of God.
Thank you. Muhammad Asif Gumrah, you may have your question now.
Yeah, Jazakallah, Dr. and good questions by the participant. My question is that we are building a mosque in our area, and we normally go for fundraising, and sometimes we go for fundraising at, yesterday I was at one of the big DC, grocery stores, very big one, where all denominations of people come. Then one of the Sikh donated money. So when you are asking what you guys are doing, I said, we're building the mosque in medieval area. And they said, okay. So he donated, and one Hindu family, young family, gave money to his 2-year-old son to put into the box, and they know that we are building the mosque. So what this act, where did they stand in? I know is a philosophically and religiously we are said. I do not know how to rate it. I was quite impressed with the deeds.
I think it's a beautiful gesture. I mean, this is something of an outstanding gesture. And why not? Why shouldn't? And we should reciprocate as well if they are building temples, or maybe their own gurdwaras. If you donate for them, because you see, minorities are protected by the state, and if the state grants them money to build their temples, or to build their gurdwaras, or to build their worship places, this is the responsibility which the state can take up for its minorities. So if the state can do that, as citizens, we can also reciprocate by donating for their worship places, because they are minorities.
Yeah, so this is quite impressive to me, because that was the first time experience. And I don't think that a Muslim will going to feel to donate into a temple. I mean, generally speaking, I'm just saying, as what we've been grind.
That is precisely, in my humble opinion, a slightly prejudiced attitude, because you see, what you're doing is if the state is responsible, because you see, remember, zakat is to be given to the state, and the state is going to be responsible for, I'm talking about a nation state. A nation state is responsible to protect every citizen and to provide basic facilities for them regarding their collective lives. So if it is going to start a mosque, if a nation state, so to speak, I mean, the nation state, whether let's forget about whether it's a Muslim or not, in nation state, if it is going to provide for the worship places of Muslims, then it should provide for the worship places of, for the Jews, synagogues and churches and temples. So if that money can be given by the state, that we pay to them, and then dispersed these places. So in places where the state is not collecting zakat or tax the way we find in many Muslim third world countries, it's just on behalf of the state that we are doing the same thing. So my personal view in this is that if you give money as a temple or any place of worship, I think it's it's something that cannot be objected to. One might not feel comfortable, that's another thing.
Yeah.
But I personally think that discomfort or comfort is one thing, and prohibition is another thing.
Yeah, because we are in the building right now, and we are renting the church, and church people are very much generous in providing all the facility to us to do Friday prayers and Tarawih in the church, and we have a very good interfaith relationship with them and the other local communities, non-Muslim others, the Hindus and other, we are very very cohesive understanding. So I thought I'd bring it into the light that that we other participants have a perspective on it as well. So Jazakallah for your take on it.
Thank you. Fatma, you may ask your second question now.
Yes, I want to ask that we've been stopped to prostrate during the Zawal time, but what about like reading Quran or reading something on the tasbih? And also, what's the reality of walking in front of a namazi?
So first of all, there is no such thing as Zawal time, and there is no such thing as any prohibition of Zawal time. This is a misconception that is very common. The only times of prohibition of prostration, and that is prostration. You can still read the Quran. Prostration is sunrise and sunset. This is only in our subcontinent and some other Muslim countries where we regard Zawal to be a part of the prohibited time of prayer, because it is the opinion of some of the Hanafite jurists. Imam Malik, for example, never said this, and he lived in Medina. And if we collate all the sources, we'll find that there is a misconception, and that has arisen because of a hadith. So the hadith says that Abridu Zuhr. These are the words of the Prophet, which means that cool down your Zuhr prayer, or offer your Zuhr prayer when the sun descends and it's slightly cooler. And if you collect all these narratives, you'll find that this is not something which the Prophet is telling people religiously. It is more of an advice, keeping in view the immense heat which was in those times in the sandy desert of Arabia. It was literally, it would burn your skin, and it was very harsh. Even today, such is the case. So the Prophet was basically advising Muslims to offer the Zuhr prayer at a less hot time when the sun is descending. And by mixing up these narratives, people came up with the idea that perhaps the Prophet is telling us that this time of the sun's descent, which is called Zawal, is a prohibited time. This is not the case. So the only prohibited time is sunrise and sunset, and that too for prostration. You can read the Quran or any other ibadah other than prostration, because what happens in sunrise and sunset is that idolatrous nations, they would prostrate before the sun at sunrise and sunset. And by the way, there are many Chinese sects even today who have this ritual of expressing devotion to the sun at these times. So don't think that this has gone away from this planet as yet. So that is the reason. I'm forgetting your last question.
What's the reality of walking in front of a namazi, like when you're
so
offering namaz at home?
Okay, what happened was that this is again a very, very, I would say, for lack of a better word, I'd say it's quite hilarious, hilarious misconception. And the reason I say it's hilarious is that because of gross misunderstanding, again, some of the things that occurred in the times of the Prophet. You see, the janimaz, or the prayer mat, this is a recent invention. There were no prayer mats at the times of the Prophet. In the mosque of Nabawi, they had those gravel stones which were spread on the floor. Other than that, they would have a rough sort of a cloth that they're spread. So the concept of prayer mat was not there in those times. So the Prophet said, when you are praying, you just stick a sutra. The word sutra in Arabic means the place just before you can do sajda, you can prostrate. And it was said, well, don't anyone, if you're praying, at times people don't realize you're praying. So people must not cross between you while you're standing and the place on which, the direct place on which you are supposed to prostrate, which is to be guarded or to be actually signified by a small piece of wood or something that would be put there. And basically the prohibition was to walk as if the Prophet was saying, don't walk on the prayer mat. Don't walk on the space which is between the person who is standing and the place on which he's going to prostrate. This is what the Prophet had said. As far as walking after that is concerned, as today might be the case, for example, when we are praying, we have a prayer mat, and that prayer mat automatically outlines the final place that we are going to prostrate. So that itself is a sutra. Sutra is an Arabic word which means a place which is, or a mark which is guarded, which is stuck in the ground to signify a certain benchmark. So as far as passing beyond that benchmark is concerned, which is beyond the place of your prostration, it is fine. I mean, you can still show respect because it might cause disruption in one's concentration. So that's another thing. But today people think that even passing in front of the a namazi or a prayer person, or a person doing the prayer after that prayer mat is going to entail 40 years of punishment in hell, as is spoken by many of our sermonizers. That it absolutely is a gross misunderstanding. So if I sum up, what the Prophet intended was that no one should pass between the person and the place between on which he's going to prostrate, that part of the earth. And this is obviously very logical. Why should one pass on that space? But beyond that space, it is fine. I mean, it is fine that you can do. However, if you think that this could disturb the person's concentration, okay, you can walk behind him, but it bears no label of prohibition. The label of prohibition is borne by that space in which you were to offer the sajda. So I've gone in a little more detail in explaining this question because this is such a huge misconception, and I can see people when they pray in their mosques and they would like to go back and cross over, they keep standing and waiting for the previous namazi to finish his prayer. And at times they have to, I mean, literally they don't go to the first saf, which has a lot of reward, because they think that if they have to get out early, they have to, I mean, cross people and say what. So what they do is they choose to pray in the last row and don't realize that, I mean, the further you go, the further reward that you get. So you sacrifice the reward because you're in a hurry, and you know that hurry, I mean, can only be catered for if you're standing in the last row. So this is the price that people pay by not understanding that this never was the practice of, or never was the directive of the Prophet.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you for answering all our questions. That's the end of the line of questions today.
Okay, inshallah, tomorrow.